The air at Mojave Desert Air Base was always dry. It smelled of dust, jet fuel, and something old. It was an air base of contrasts. Shiny new F-35s, sleek and quiet as sharks, sat on one side of the tarmac. And on the other, looking like they were pulled from a museum, sat the A-10s, the warthogs. They were not pretty. They were tough, mean, and built around a gun that fired shells the size of milk bottles. They were flying tanks, and they were Captain Eva Rostova's entire world. Eva Colsane Reaper was as tough as her plane. She was quiet, with sharp blue eyes that missed nothing and dark hair pulled into a tight military bun. She didn't smile much. She didn't have to. She was, by every measure, the best A-10 pilot in the squadron. But in the polished, political world of the modern Air Force, that didn't mean much. Her problem was Colonel Stryker. Stryker was the new wing commander. He was a man who loved the idea of the Air Force. He loved the new jets, the billion-dollar contracts, and the smooth handshakes with congressmen. He hated the A-10. He called it a flying tractor. He saw it as a relic, a leftover from a bygone era, and by extension he saw pilots like Eva the same way. "Captain Rostova," he'd said at a briefing, his voice dripping with false kindness, "I see you're flying the hog again today. Try not to, scare the civilians. It's so loud." The other pilots, young F-35 jocks with perfect smiles, would snicker. They called her Reaper behind her back, not out of respect, but because they said she was reaping the scraps of the Air Force's budget. They saw her as a throwback, a woman stubbornly clinging to a plane that was destined for the boneyard. Eva never said a word. She just nodded, took her flight plan, and went to work. Her strength was quiet. It was the kind of strength that didn't need applause. It was forged in her small, dying hometown of Sonora Creek, just 50 miles from the base. Sonora Creek was a town built on military pride. Her father, Mike Rostova, was a retired A-10 crew chief. He now ran a small hardware store that was barely staying open. The whole town was failing. Businesses were shuttered. The local VA clinic, once a point of pride, was now a hollowed-out building with a closed sign on the door. "It doesn't make sense," Mike would tell Eva on her one night off. He'd stir his coffee, his brow furrowed. "The base budget is bigger than ever. Stryker is always in the paper talking about community investment. But where is the money, Eva? Where is it all going?" Eva knew her father was digging into something. He'd been talking to other veterans, looking at shipping manifests he'd gotten from friends still on the base. He suspected corruption. He suspected Stryker was bleeding the base dry, siphoning off supplies, fuel, and equipment. "Be careful, Dad," Eva warned him, her voice low. "You be careful," he replied, pointing a finger at her. "Stryker doesn't like you. You're a reminder of the old ways. And you're my daughter. He knows I'm asking questions. Don't let him put you in a corner." The threat didn't come in a shout. It came in a sterile email. "Captain Rostova, report to my office, 600, dress uniform." When Eva walked in, Colonel Stryker was admiring a sleek silver model of an F-35 on his desk. He didn't look at her. "Captain," he said, still polishing the model, "we have a situation, a delicate one." He turned, his smile as cold as the morning air. "We have a high-value target, a renegade fuel depot in the Quail Springs restricted area. It's popped up overnight. Very bad business. We need it gone. Immediately." Eva stood at attention. "Understood, sir. I'll have my squadron ready to fly." Stryker held up a hand. No, this isn't a squadron mission. This is surgical and quiet. We can't risk a big footprint. It's a solo mission, Captain." Eva's blood ran cold. A solo mission to take out a depot. "Sir," Eva said, her voice steady, "a solo against a potentially fortified position. The risk is extreme." "Which is why I'm sending you," Stryker said, his voice smooth. "You're my best hog pilot. You know that old bird better than anyone. Besides," he added, "the intel suggests they have some surprisingly advanced air defenses, something new. We can't risk one of the new F-35s. They're just too valuable." The insult was clear. The F-35s were too valuable. She and her plane were not. "This is top secret, Captain," Stryker continued. "Complete communications blackout. No radio contact, period. You go in, you destroy the target, and you come back. The mission is yours. You leave at 400 tomorrow." He handed her a data file. "Your flight plan, don't be late." As Eva walked out, she heard Stryker's voice call after her. "Oh, and Captain." She turned. "Do try to bring the plane back," he said with a thin smile. "The boneyard is full as it is." Eva left the office, the data file feeling like a block of ice in her hand. She looked at the flight plan. The target was in the middle of a deep, winding canyon system. The flight path was suicidal. It was designed to expose her to ground fire from every possible angle. This wasn't a mission, it was an execution. Stryker knew her father was getting close. This was his way of handling the Rostova problem. He was sending her to die wrapped in the flag of a top-secret mission. She would be listed as killed in action, a hero, and her father, broken by grief, would stop digging. Eva's hands were steady. Her face was a mask of calm. But inside, a cold, hard anger was beginning to burn. They thought her mission was suicide. They thought she was just a quiet, obedient woman who would fly her tractor into a trap and die. They didn't know Eva Rostova, and they didn't know what her A-10 could really do. She wasn't just going to fly this mission. She was going to survive it, and she was going to bring the thunder back home. The pre-dawn chill of the desert was absolute. At 300, the flight line was a ghost town bathed in the eerie yellow glow of the sodium lamps. There was only one plane being prepped, Eva's A-10, call sign Vanguard 7-1. Her crew chief, a young airman named Diaz, was running diagnostics. He was quiet, but he was good. He loved the as much as Eva did. "Ma'am," Diaz whispered, his breath plumbing in the cold. He never looked up from his data pad. "This is weird." "What is it, Diaz?" Eva asked, her voice low as she inspected the landing gear. "Your weapons package, it was preloaded. Colonel Stryker's special projects team did it, not us. They locked me out of the manifest." Eva stopped. "What else?" "The TGP, ma'am, the targeting pod. The diagnostics are clean, but the software was patched, an update I've never seen before. And your radio," he said, finally looking at her, his eyes wide with fear. "It's not just comms out, ma'am. The main transceiver has been slaved to a high-frequency burst transmitter. It's set to auto-activate on weapons release." Eva understood instantly. It was a dead man's switch. The moment she fired her missiles, the transmitter would send a single burst. Mission complete. And if she was shot down, as Stryker planned, that would be the last anyone heard. It was clean. It was tidy. And it was murder. "Get it working, Diaz," Eva said, her voice hard as steel. "I don't care how, find a bypass. I want my radio, but don't let the system know you fixed it. Make it look like it's still broken." "Ma'am, that's—" "Do it," she said. It wasn't a request. Diaz, recognizing the look in his captain's eyes, just nodded. "Yes, ma'am, I'll get it done." Before climbing into the cockpit, Eva made one call, from a burner phone she kept in her locker. "Dad," she said, when his gravelly voice picked up. "Eva, it's 3 in the morning. What's wrong?" "I'm going on a long flight, Dad. A solo trip out of state." There was a long silence. Mike Rostova knew the sound of his daughter's voice. He knew what solo trip meant. "How bad is it?" he asked. "It's the one we talked about," she said. "The one they send you on when they don't want you coming back." She heard him take a sharp, pained breath. "Eva, my God, don't go report it. Call the Inspector General." "To who, Dad?" Eva said, the cold anger rising in her. "To Stryker's friends. I'm in the air in 30 minutes. There's no one to call. Listen to me. You were right. You're onto something. He's trying to get me out of the way, so whatever you have, don't stop. You find it. You find out where the money is going." "I don't care about the money, Eva," her father choked out. "I care about you." "I know," she said, and for a moment her voice almost broke. "That's why you have to listen. I'm going to fly this mission, but I'm not going to die. I'm coming home, I promise, but I need you to be ready. I think Stryker is making his big move. Soon." "What do you mean?" "He's all over the news about the Sonora Creek Founders Day Festival. He's the guest of honor. He's promising some big announcement. That's when he'll do it, Dad. That's when he'll announce his big investment, and all the money he stole will just disappear into his new project." "I'll be there," Mike said, his voice now as hard as hers. "I'll be waiting." "Good," Eva said. "I love you, Dad." "I love you, Reaper. You give him hell." She hung up. At 400, the A-10's twin engines screamed to life. Eva, Warthog, was loaded for bear. It was heavy with bombs and missiles. She taxied to the runway, the lights of the base disappearing behind her. She lifted off, a dark, heavy shadow against the stars, and turned toward the mountains. The flight was long, 2 hours, just her, the hum of the engines, and the vast, empty darkness. The radio was silent. As far as the base knew, she was a ghost. As the sun began to bleed purple and orange over the jagged eastern peaks, she reached the target area, the Quail Springs Canyon. She descended, hugging the canyon walls, her systems passive. Her radar warning receiver was silent. There were no advanced air defenses. There was no chatter, no radar, no threat, just wind. Stryker had lied. She crested a final ridge, and there it was. But it wasn't a renegade fuel depot. It was a small, hidden airfield. On the ground were 6 massive, civilian-marked fuel tankers. They were parked next to a sleek private cargo plane. The logo on the side of the tankers was unmistakable, a stylized Stryker Logistics. The name was on a banner hanging in her hometown, promising to rebuild Sonora Creek. Men in khaki uniforms, not military, were pumping fuel from the tankers into the cargo plane. Eva's blood turned to ice. This was it. This was her dad's missing money. It wasn't just supplies, it was fuel. Millions of gallons of Air Force jet fuel being stolen and sold on the black market. This wasn't a renegade depot. This was Stryker's private gas station. And then she saw it. Parked near the convoy were 2 flatbed trucks. Mounted on them were not rifles, but sophisticated, military-grade anti-aircraft missile systems. The trap was real. They weren't there to protect the depot. They were there to wait for her. Stryker's plan was diabolical. He would send her in to destroy his old operation. She would fire her missiles, and her mission complete burst would be sent. Then these men, his private security, would shoot her down. She would be the hero who died destroying the enemy. And he would be the commander who had just wiped his own operation clean, eliminating all the evidence and silencing his biggest problem, Eva, all in one clean shot. Her hand hovered over the weapon's release. This was the moment. This was where she was supposed to die. But Eva Rostova had other plans. She thought about her dad. She thought about her dying town. She thought about the mockery in Stryker's eyes. She armed her weapons, but she didn't arm the missiles. She armed the one thing the A-10 was built for, the one thing that terrified everyone. She armed the gun. The men on the ground hadn't seen her. They were comfortable, working lazily in the early morning light. Eva was a ghost, hidden by the canyon walls and the roar of their own pumps. She had seconds to make a decision that would define the rest of her life. If she fired the missiles as planned, the burst transmitter would signal her success, and those missile launchers down there would light her up. She'd be dead. If she turned and ran, they'd see her, and she'd be dead. This was the suicide mission. There was no way out. But Stryker had made one mistake. He assumed she was just a pilot. He forgot she was her father's daughter. She wasn't just a pilot, she was a warrior. And he had given her a plane built for one thing, war. He also forgot about the TGP, the targeting pod. Diaz had said it was patched. Stryker would want proof. He'd want a recording of his problem being solved. Eva switched her main display to the pod's feed. She hit the record button. The high-definition camera zoomed in, capturing everything. The Stryker Logistics logo, the faces of the men. The license plates on the tankers, the illegal transfer of U.S. government property. She saved the file, locking it into the plane's black box recorder. Now she had the evidence, she just had to get it home. "Okay, girl," she whispered to the plane. "Let's show them what a tractor can do." She pushed the stick forward, diving into the canyon. She didn't fire. She flew straight at the convoy, low and terrifyingly fast. The A-10 is not a quiet plane. The sound of its engines hit the men like a physical blow. They looked up, their faces turning from confusion to pure animal panic. They scrambled for the missile launchers, too late. Eva's thumb pressed the trigger for the 30 GAU-8 Avenger cannon. The sound was not a pop, pop, pop. It was a terrifying, guttural roar that ripped the air apart. B-R-R-R-R-R-R-R-R-R-R-T. She wasn't aiming for the men. She wasn't aiming for the fuel. She was aiming for the engines. A 3-second burst, 400 high-explosive incendiary rounds, tore the engine blocks of the 6 fuel tankers and the private cargo plane to shreds. Metal vaporized. Engines exploded. The planes and trucks were grounded, useless, but the fuel, the evidence, was still intact. Then she turned her attention to the missile launchers. B-R-R-R-R-R-R-R-R-R-T. She raked the first flatbed truck. The missile system exploded in a massive fireball. The second truck panicked. It launched a missile wild. The missile shrieked past Eva's cockpit, close enough for her to feel the heat. She was in the fight now. The A-10 was slow, but it could turn on a dime. She banked hard, popping flares. The men on the ground were firing rifles, the bullets plinking harmlessly off the titanium bathtub that surrounded her cockpit. Another missile launched. This one had a lock. Come on, Eva hissed. She pulled the A-10 into a climb, then rolled it, diving back toward the ground, dragging the missile with her. At the last second, she dumped a cloud of flares and chaff and broke hard left. The missile, confused by the countermeasures, slammed into the canyon wall. She had one target left, the second missile launcher. She lined it up. B-R-R-R-R-R-R-R-R-R-R-T. The truck and its launcher disappeared in a cloud of shrapnel and fire. The entire fight had lasted 30 seconds. Eva was breathing hard. Her warning lights were flashing. The plane was hit. She'd taken rounds to the right engine and the wing. Hydraulic fluid was leaking. The plane was vibrating, pulling hard to the right. But she was flying. She climbed out of the canyon, her heart pounding a drumbeat against her ribs. She was alive. She checked her systems. The right engine was failing, but the left was holding. The radio, Diaz had done his job. The broken radio crackled to life in her ear, but she couldn't use it, not yet. She was 200 miles from her home base, but she couldn't go back there. If she landed at Mojave, Stryker would have her arrested. He would claim she'd gone rogue, fired on civilians. The plane would be seized, the black box lost, and she would be buried so deep in a military prison she would never see the sun again. She looked at her fuel gauge. The leak in the right wing tank was bad. She was losing fuel fast. She didn't have enough to make it to another state. She didn't have enough to make it to another friendly base. She had just enough fuel for one thing. She looked down at the desert floor passing beneath her. She knew this land. This was her home. 50 miles away was Sonora Creek, her town. The town Stryker was robbing blind. The town that was, at this very moment, setting up for its Founders' Day festival, the festival where Colonel Stryker himself was the guest of honor. A new plan formed in her mind, a terrible, reckless, and beautiful plan. She was not going back to the base. She was going home. She keyed the radio, not to the military frequency, but to the open, international emergency channel. The channel everyone could hear. Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is Air Force Vanguard 7-1, Captain Eva Rostova. I'm declaring an emergency. I have battle damage. I have battle damage. Both engines failing. I'm unable to maintain altitude. She was lying. The left engine was holding fine. I am unable to reach Mojave Air Base, she continued, her voice strained, injecting a perfect note of panic. I am going to attempt an emergency landing. I am aiming for the Sonora Creek Municipal Airstrip. This was the masterstroke. The Sonora Creek Municipal Airstrip hadn't been used in 20 years. It was now the town's main street. The same main street that was, at this moment, being cordoned off for the Founders' Day parade. Every civilian air traffic controller, every local news station, every police scanner in a 100-mile radius just lit up. A damaged A-10 Warthog was about to crash land in the middle of a town festival. She heard a voice on the radio. It was the Mojave control tower. It was Stryker. His voice was no longer smooth. It was a panicked, furious roar. Vanguard 7-1, what are you doing? You are ordered to return to base. I repeat, return to base immediately. Eva took a deep breath. She looked at the smoke trailing from her right engine. She thought of her father. She switched her radio back off. She was done taking his orders. She flew on, a wounded bird of prey, the evidence of Stryker's crimes locked safely in her black box. She was bringing the thunder, and she was bringing it right to his front door. The town of Sonora Creek was alive for the first time in years. Bright red, white, and blue banners snapped in the desert wind, strung between the lampposts on Main Street. The high school marching band was tuning up, their instruments glinting in the mid-morning sun. Half the town was crowded onto the sidewalks, waving little American flags. On a raised wooden podium in the town square, Colonel Stryker stood, looking every inch the hero. His dress blue uniform was immaculate. He smiled, waving to the crowd, shaking hands with the mayor. He was in his element. He was about to give a speech announcing a massive private investment in Sonora Creek, courtesy of a new partner, Stryker Logistics. It was his masterpiece. He would be seen as the town's savior, all while laundering the millions he had just stolen. His Eva Rostova problem was, at this very moment, a smoking crater in the desert. In the back of the crowd, Mike Rostova stood, his arms crossed. His face was a mask of gray stone. He looked at the sky. Come on, Eva, he muttered under his breath. Come on, baby, come home. Stryker tapped the microphone. My dear friends, he began, his voice booming over the speakers. My neighbors, it is my profound honor to be here today. In times of struggle, we look for heroes. We look for those who are willing to make the ultimate sacrifice. And that's when they heard it. It wasn't the sound of the marching band. It was a sound that shook the windows in the old brick buildings. A high-pitched, desperate whistle, followed by a low, guttural roar. A woman in the crowd pointed to the sky. My God, look. Every head turned. Bursting over the low hills south of town was not a flock of birds. It was a plane, a military jet. It was low, black, and trailing a thick plume of smoke. It was Eva's A-10. People screamed. They scattered, thinking it was a terrorist attack, thinking it was going to crash. On the podium, Colonel Stryker's face went from confusion to a sickly, pale white. He knew that plane. It wasn't supposed to be here. It was supposed to be gone. No, he whispered. No, no, no. The A-10 screamed over the town square, so low that people were knocked over by the wind. Eva popped a burst of flares, a shower of brilliant fire that lit up the sky. It was a signal. Get out of the way. Main Street was clear, the parade route. It was straight, it was long, and it was just wide enough. Eva was fighting the controls. This was the hardest landing of her life. She had no margin for error. She dropped her landing gear. The thump, thump, thump of the gear locking into place was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. She lined up the plane with the double yellow line of Main Street. On the podium, Stryker was frozen in terror. He watched, horrified, as the 100,000-pound attack jet, riddled with bullet holes, descended toward him. The A-10 hit the asphalt. The impact was bone-jarring. The heavy-duty landing gear, designed for rough fields in war zones, held. Sparks flew as the plane's wingtips, just inches from the lampposts, tore through the patriotic banners. The plane screeched, a sound of tortured metal as Eva slammed on the brakes. It slid, it smoked, but it held its line. The A-10 Warthog finally came to a stop, its massive, 7-barreled cannon pointed directly at the podium. It was so close, Colonel Stryker could have reached out and touched it. The town was dead silent. The only sound was the tick-tick-tick of the cooling engines and the hiss of leaking hydraulic fluid. Then the canopy of the cockpit popped open. Eva Rostova, covered in sweat and grease, unstrapped herself. She stood up in the cockpit, a dark figure against the bright blue sky. She didn't look at Stryker, not yet. She climbed down the side of her ravaged plane. In her hand, she held the black box data cartridge. Mike Rostova pushed through the stunned crowd. Eva, he shouted, his voice breaking with relief. At the same time, 2 men in dark suits who had been standing near Mike stepped forward. They walked calmly toward the podium. Stryker saw them. He tried to regain his composure. Captain Rostova, he shouted, his voice shaky but full of false authority. What is the meaning of this? You have endangered civilians. You are in violation of a direct order. I am placing you under arrest. He started to walk toward her. I wouldn't, a new voice said. One of the men in suits flipped open a badge. Agent Harris, FBI, Colonel Stryker, you are to remain on that podium. Stryker froze. Eva walked right past him. She didn't spare him a glance. She walked directly to Agent Harris and handed him the data cartridge. Her voice was low, hoarse, but it carried in the dead silence of the town square. Agent Harris, she said, her voice cracking with exhaustion and fury. Here is the high-definition footage of Colonel Stryker's illegal fuel theft operation in the Quail Springs Canyon. It also contains footage of his private army firing on a United States Air Force asset. Me. Stryker's world collapsed. This is a lie, a fabrication. She's hysterical. She's a rogue pilot. Finally, Eva turned. She faced the man who had sent her to die. She was no longer the quiet, overlooked pilot. Her eyes were burning with a cold, righteous fire. I was ordered to destroy that depot to cover your tracks, Colonel, she said, her voice now rising, echoing across the square. I was supposed to fire my missiles and be shot down by your men. A hero's death. The crowd gasped. They were connecting the dots. The town's savior was a thief and a murderer. You thought my mission was suicide, Eva said, her voice dropping to a deadly quiet. You thought I was weak. You thought my plane was a tractor. She slapped the bullet-riddled fuselage of her A-10. The sound was like a gunshot. This tractor just saved my life. It just saved this town, and it just ended you." The FBI agent nodded to his partner. "Colonel Stryker, you're under arrest for grand theft, conspiracy to commit murder, and treason." As the agents climbed the podium and put Stryker in handcuffs, the crowd erupted. It wasn't a cheer. It was a roar of anger, of shock, and of dawning, thunderous respect. Eva Rostova leaned against her plane, her legs finally giving out. Her father ran to her, wrapping her in his arms as she finally let herself shake. She was home, and the thunder had arrived. The aftermath was a storm. The arrest of a wing commander on a podium in front of an entire town with a bullet triddled as the primary witness was not something the Air Force could sweep under the rug. The data on Eva's black box was ironclad. It was a high-definition, undeniable record of Stryker's entire criminal empire. The Stryker Logistics Company was a shell, and the Founder's Day announcement was his plan to launder the stolen millions into a redevelopment project he himself owned. He had been robbing the military and his own hometown for years. Stryker was gone. His network of corrupt officers and pilots who had mocked Eva were either arrested or dishonorably discharged. The story was everywhere. "The warthog of Sonora Creek," the papers called her. But Eva's fight wasn't over. She was a hero to the public, but to the military she was a problem. She had disobeyed a direct order. She had violated communications blackout. And she had landed $1 billion military asset on a public street, endangering civilians. She had to face a court-martial. The hearing room was small, cold, and private. At the head table sat a 3-star general, a man with cold eyes and a chest full of ribbons. The prosecutor laid out the case. "Captain Rostova," the prosecutor said, his voice flat, "you are, by your own admission, guilty of gross insubordination. You took it upon yourself to defy a superior officer. You flew your damaged aircraft into a civilian center. Your actions were reckless, dangerous, and unbecoming of an officer." Eva stood at attention. She was no longer the quiet pilot. The fire she'd found in that canyon was still burning. "Sir," she said, her voice clear and strong, "I am guilty of one thing, choosing my oath over my orders. My order was illegal. I was ordered to murder American citizens to cover up a felony. I was sent on a mission with one purpose: to die." She looked the general in the eye. "My superior officer was a traitor. My reckless action was the only way to deliver the evidence of that treason to a neutral party. If I had returned to base, that black box would have been destroyed and I would have been silenced. My insubordination was a moral necessity." She took a breath. "As for endangering civilians, my plane was sound. My left engine was strong. I lied about my emergency to create a safe landing zone. The municipal airstrip on my map was Main Street. It was the longest, straightest, and thanks to the parade, clearest piece of pavement in the county. It was not a reckless crash, sir. It was a precision landing." The prosecutor was speechless. The general stared at Eva for a long, heavy minute. The room was silent. Finally, the general spoke. "Captain," he said, his voice a low rumble, "your actions were unprecedented. They were, by the book, a dozen different kinds of illegal." He paused, a slight smile touching his lips. "They were also the finest display of courage, airmanship, and moral clarity I have seen in my 40-year career. This hearing is a formality. You are cleared of all charges. Your record will be expunged. Case dismissed." He stood up and saluted her. "You did your country proud, Captain." The story ends 3 months later. Sonora Creek was changing. With Stryker's stolen assets seized, the money was finally flowing back into the community. The VA clinic had a grand reopening sign out front. Mike Rostova's hardware store was fully stocked, and he was hearing. The town had a new, permanent landmark. The town council had voted to keep the A-10. It sat in the town square, its bullet holes patched, its cannon silent. It was a monument to the day their town was saved. At Mojave Air Base, the atmosphere was different, too. The A-10s were no longer the flying tractors. They were the Sonora survivors. Eva Rostova walked onto the flight line. She was no longer captain. She was Major Rostova, the new squadron commander. The young pilots who used to snicker at her now snapped to attention. Their eyes were filled with a respect that bordered on awe. Diaz, now a staff sergeant, was her crew chief again. He pointed to her new plane, a fresh A-10 with her name painted under the cockpit. They gave you a new call sign, Major," he said, grinning. Eva looked. Under the glass where it used to say Reaper was one new, bold, white word. Thunder. Eva smiled, a real, warm smile. She looked at her plane, then at the clear blue sky. She climbed the ladder, settled into the cockpit, and keyed the radio. Mojave Tower, she said, her voice ringing with a new, easy confidence. This is Thunder One, requesting permission to fly. The answer came back, clear and strong, from a controller who couldn't hide the admiration in his voice. Thunder One, you are cleared for takeoff. The sky is yours, Major. Welcome home.